rally for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs, stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki show. The Nomiki show. The Nomiki show. The Nomiki show. clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, faith fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.
Today is indeed a wonderful day. As we gather to celebrate the confirmation of the next Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. President George Washington once referred to America as a great experiment, a nation founded on the previously untested belief that the people, we the people, could form a more perfect union. And that belief has pushed our nation forward for generations. And it is that belief that we reaffirmed yesterday. Through the confirmation of the first Black woman to the United States Supreme Court, you will inspire generations of leaders. They will watch your confirmation hearings and read your decisions. In the years to come, the court will answer fundamental questions about who we are and what kind of country we live in. The young leaders of our nation will learn from the experience, the judgment, the wisdom that you, Judge Jackson, will apply, and they will see for the first time 4 women sitting on that court at one time. So indeed, the road toward our more perfect union is not always straight, and it is not always smooth, but sometimes it leads to a day like today.
This is going to let so much sun shine on so many young women, so many young Black women, so many minorities, that it's real. It's real. We're going to look back, nothing to do with me. We're going to look back and see this as a moment of real change in American history. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I knew the person I nominated will be put through a painful and difficult confirmation process. But I have to tell you, what Judge Jackson was put through was well beyond that. There was verbal abuse, the anger, the constant interruptions, the most vile, baseless assertions and accusations. In the face of it all, Judge Jackson showed the incredible character and integrity she possesses. Ketanji, or I'm not going to be calling you that in public anymore. Judge, you are the very definition of what we Irish refer to as dignity. You have enormous dignity, and it communicates to people. It's contagious, and it matters. You know, and that strength lifted up millions of Americans who watched you, Judge Jackson, especially women and women of color, who have had to run the gauntlet in their own lives. So many of my cabinet members are women of color, women that represent every sector of the community. It's my honor, and it truly is an honor. I've been looking forward to it for a while, to introduce you the next Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, the Honorable Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. It is the greatest honor of my life to be here with you at this moment. As you may have heard, during the confirmation process, I had the distinct honor of having 95 personal meetings with 97 sitting senators. And we had substantive and engaging conversations about my approach to judging and about the role of judges in the constitutional system we all love. As a brief aside, I will note that these are subjects about which I care deeply. I have dedicated my career to public service because I love this country. I also understand from my many years of practice as a legal advocate, as a trial judge, and as a judge on a court of appeals, that part of the genius of the constitutional framework of the United States is its design, and that the framers entrusted the judicial branch with the crucial but limited role. I've also spent the better part of the past decade hearing thousands of cases and writing hundreds of opinions, and in every instance, I have done my level best to stay in my lane and to reach a result that is consistent with my understanding of the law and with the obligation to rule independently without fear or favor. Thank you as well to the many, many kind-hearted people from all over this country and around the world who have reached out to me directly in recent weeks with messages of support. I have spent years toiling away in the relative solitude of my chambers with just my law clerks in isolation, so it's been somewhat overwhelming in a good way to recently be flooded with thousands of notes and cards and photos expressing just how much this moment means to so many people. The notes that I've received from children are particularly cute and especially meaningful because more than anything, they speak directly to the hope and promise of America. It has taken 232 years and 115 prior appointments for a Black woman to be selected to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States. But we've made it. And our children are telling me that they see now, more than ever, that here in America, anything is possible. They also tell me that I'm a role model, which I take both as an opportunity and as a huge responsibility. I am feeling up to the task primarily because I know that I am not alone. I am standing on the shoulders of my own role models, generations of Americans who never had anything close to this kind of opportunity, but who got up every day and went to work believing in the promise of America, showing others through their determination and, yes, their perseverance that good things can be done in this great country. From my grandparents on both sides, who had only a grade school education but instilled in my parents the importance of learning, to my parents, who went to racially segregated schools growing up and were the first in their families to have the chance to go to college. I am also ever buoyed by the leadership of generations past who helped to light the way: Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Justice Thurgood Marshall, and my personal heroine, Judge Constance Baker Motley. They and so many others did the heavy lifting that made this day possible. I have now achieved something far beyond anything my grandparents could have possibly ever imagined. But no one does this on their own. The path was cleared for me so that I might rise to this occasion. And in the poetic words of Dr. Maya Angelou, I do so now while bringing the gifts my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. So as I take on this new role, I strongly believe that this is a moment in which all Americans can take great pride. We have come a long way toward perfecting our union. In my family, it took just one generation to go from segregation to the Supreme Court of the United States. And it is an honor, the honor of a lifetime, for me to have this chance to join the court, to promote the rule of law at the highest level, and to do my part to carry our shared project of democracy and equal justice under law forward into the future.
Hello and welcome to the Nomiki Show. It's Friday, April 8th. It is Femme Friday, and what a Femme Friday. You were just listening to soon-to-be Supreme Court Justice Judge Jackson. Ketanji Brown Jackson was delivering her remarks at the White House after she got the votes needed to become the next Supreme Court Justice to replace Breyer. She is extremely qualified, one of the most qualified judges to be nominated in modern history. This is historic. She thanked everybody from President Obama for nominating her to the first federal district court for herself and her family, her ancestors. It was a really beautiful, touching, incredibly historic speech that she just gave, you know, talking about children and being a role model and accepting being a role model for so many women, Black women across the country and the next generation. So a really powerful day, a great way to start off the show for Femme Friday. I do want to briefly just touch on the ridiculous of this moment with, I don't know if you guys saw it, but there were a few Republicans who did vote for Justice Brown. And not only did they vote for her, they had the dignity to clap for her, unlike their colleagues who were ruthless, disgusting, racist, sexist, immoral, un-American. Let's show this clip of the Senate chambers as the vote came in yesterday.
On this vote, the yeas are 53, the nays are 47, and this nomination is confirmed.
I mean, I teared up watching it. I'm sorry, because first, you know, I shouldn't have to say like kudos to Mitt Romney for being a senator, for doing the right thing, whether he voted for her or not. This is historic. It's historic in that a Supreme Court justice just received the votes necessary to sit on the Supreme Court, and then of course she is the first Black woman, and she is possibly the most accomplished justice that sits on the Supreme Court right now. It's to witness a walkout by Republican senators that did not vote for her. That really is a reflection of where we are as a society right now. And I think our country's not perfect, and you know, we have these wins occasionally that give us hope and show us some sort of pathway. But you know, the truth is that this is a party, the Republican Party has gone so far right and aligned themselves so much with Trump and such hostility. They're overtly racist, overtly sexist. They're overtly going after a woman's, you know, autonomy over their bodies, you know, all across the country. The attacks on voting rights are explicitly racist. You know, this is like 1930s era politics. They're just flat out the aggression. And this is happening at a time when there's a lot of misinformation being put out there online, as we've discussed, you know, quite a bit on the show, that is being fed by Russia. And so for many reasons, they're not patriots. This is the most unpatriotic thing you can do, but they're also mimicking, Russian talking points while they're at it, which, they're pushing a lot of these theories as well. So this is an historic day. I think we should be very proud of ourselves as a country for being able to have this historic moment for Black women around the world to see what is doable, that there is a path, that there is a model, and that if we organize well enough, more people who did not have a path a decade ago, 2 decades ago, 2 generations, 3 generations, 4 generations, formerly enslaved, the legacy of formerly enslaved people, that, things can turn around. But we have a lot of work to do. All right, we have an amazing show today. It is Femme Friday, as I said. We're going to start off the day with Lily Geismer. She is the author of a new book called Left Behind, The Democrats' Failed Attempt to Solve Inequality. And then later on, we're going to have back on the show, Alison Collins, who's going to talk about how the right wing is using CRT and racism to take on teachers and teachers' unions. Of course, she faced a recall in California on a school board, and the Republicans are really they're launching these attacks all across the country. And she's going to talk a little bit more about why that's happening, what the roots are behind it. And then Jamie Peck is on. She's going to be here for the second half. We're going to be discussing a lot of crazy stuff in the news right now. We're discussing labor, Sarah Palin's new opponent I don't know if you heard, she's running for Congress in Alaska, and my favorite, Joe Rogan. So stick around for that. We'll be right back after this break.
The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show.
All right, guys, I have a lot of issues with my health, everything from sleeping to aches and pains. Oh boy, 2 nights ago, I like, this is like my ailment section of the show. Like, what ailments are you dealing with? If you're under the age of 35, get ready. That's all I gotta say. Even if you're healthy, just get ready. Because the other night I had a great night's sleep, which doesn't happen often. I slept, I have this monitor right here, and I check my sleep, and it'll tell me like, oh, you got up for 15 minutes to go to the bathroom or whatever. So 2 nights ago, I slept the entire night through, which means I didn't toss and turn, which means I woke up and my neck was all screwed up, and it still is. So I took the CBD, Sunset Lake CBD, to help me sleep, which is amazing. They have this tincture where it has melatonin in that helps you fall asleep, and the CBD helped me stay asleep. And boy, did it. But then I woke up in the morning and I had to take another form of CBD because I had the aches and pains. But thank God for CBD, because what I used to do is I would do the other stuff, and then it was really hard for me to function all day. Sunset Lake CBD is a farmer-owned company that ships craft CBD products directly from their farm in Vermont to your door. They have all types of products: gummies, tinctures, salves, coffee, which our friend Dorsey and my mom, they both like it a lot. They use it because, it wakes you up, but it doesn't make you jittery. That's all designed to help you with stress, aches, pains, keep you calm. They are an amazing company. They pay their workers, the minimum wage is $15 an hour, and the employees own the majority of the company. They also support shows like our show, The Majority Report, David Pakman Show. And when you're supporting them, you're supporting sustainable agriculture that enhances rural economies and creates meaningful employment in their community. Their farm is amazing. It's a former Ben & Jerry's farm in Vermont. I really want to go check it out. I think I might go there someday. I've been talking about that for a while. But if you go to their website right now, sunsetlakecbd.com, type in Nomi and you will get 20% off of your order. Sunsetlakecbd.com. Type in NOMI and you will get 20% off of your order. Welcome back. I saw this book was coming out and I was very excited. Lily Geismer is she's an historian. She is the author of Left Behind, which is a new book out right now. It's by Public Affairs Books. I have it in my hand right now, as you can see it. She is a professor of history at Claremont McKenna College, previous author of Don't Blame Us, Suburban Liberals, and the Transformation of the Democratic Party. This is a conversation I love to discuss, and I think so many of us love to discuss on the left. What better time than as we go into midterms and what people are saying is going to be another shellacking for the Democrats. Lily Geismer, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. And I should say I have a little bit of a cold, so if I sound a little distorted, that's the problem.
I am constantly losing my voice, as David knows. I'm always like, oh God, I'm losing my voice again because there's just so much talking in my life. I used to love talking.
I think it's from. I'll blame it on teaching.
Exactly. So, all right. The word is out. The Democrats are not what we all thought they were maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago. But I remember this, I can't remember if it was like an official rule for presidential historians or if it's just sort of something that historians talk about where, there should be a pause on official biographies of presidents of a couple of decades, partly because you start to see how their policies were enacted, how they played out. Is that something that I just heard through the grapevine, or is that true?
No, I think it's maybe it's an urban legend but I think there's often an idea of not looking to the recent past, and I think there's actually been like a sort of reticence to do that, and that was actually one of the things I wanted to do in this book, was that there wasn't a lot of real sort of critical discussion of the Democratic Party's history since the 1960s and 1970s. There's often a sort of story of it, the party pausing, and then it's sort of this story of decline. And actually in both of my book projects, I've tried to understand the party more critically during that period. And especially one of the main goals I had was to sort of rethink this moment of the 1990s and the Bill Clinton era. So it's not a biography of Bill Clinton, but it's an understanding of kind of what the sort of context in which he came to power and the kinds of policies in which he enacted and what their impacts have been.
But it is interesting because it has been a couple of decades. When I right before I joined the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2016, I read a biography on Bill Clinton, and I think that's probably when I heard like it's a little too soon, but it was. You were just starting to really understand and feel the effects of everything from NAFTA to the crime bill. I mean, you saw it. It wasn't like we were blind, but people were starting to have conversations openly about, maybe his legacy wasn't all that great because, as someone who was in school in the 2000s in college, everyone always said, oh, if we could go back to the Clinton years, the economy was great. It wasn't that great. I mean, this is actually what I really love about you. It's less about party politics and more about the economic policies that his version of the Democratic Party presented and the promise that really wasn't that great.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of things there. I mean, one, I think, and I similarly it came of age in that moment. And that was actually one of the things I really wanted to do, was to understand the story that I had been told about the 1990s. And I think that, and thinking about its long-term impact. And I think so often, especially amongst Democrats and people on the left, there's a tendency to blame Republicans for everything. And it's not to say that they're not responsible for many things, but it's also to understand kind of what Democrats were doing during this period. And I think one thing that oftentimes there's so much focus on kind of on party politics and kind of elections, but what gets forgotten is that once people are elected, they enact policies, and what do those policies look like? So that's what I really wanted to sort of understand, was the particular policies, especially that the Democrats who, it's Bill Clinton and the group that's known as the New Democrats, who sort of were concentrated around the Democratic Leadership Council. I was especially interested in their ideas about how to address the problems of poverty and inequality. And this issue, because so often the story of the 1990s is a story of economic prosperity, and that the country came in, left the 90s in a sort of moment of boom, and that's kind of the legacy of Bill Clinton. And while that was true for some groups, at the same time, there are many people who it quote unquote left behind in that process, and actually led to a position of being in a much more unstable and vulnerable position by the end of the 1990s and into the 2000s. And I think we're living in that legacy very much today.
So before we get into this this boom, this much built on credit kind of boom, what was the Democratic Leadership Council, for folks who may not know?
So it was a group, and it's an interesting. They were a group that held a lot of power, who now have kind of fallen out of the kind of conversation. But it was a group of primarily Democratic politicians who, in the aftermath of the 1984 election, which was this huge landslide loss of Walter Mondale against Ronald Reagan, had this idea that the Democratic Party needed to kind of reconfigure itself. And it was a group especially of members of Congress, many of whom were known at the time as the Atari Democrats. They were people who really believed in tech as a solution. I think that's the best name in politics that hasn't been used. And then also a lot of Southern moderate governors of states who believed the party needed to shift its priorities towards the center. And so they organized this group. And so Bill Clinton and Al Gore were both founding members of it. Their executive director was a man named Al Frum. He's still alive. I didn't mean to say that he was. Since the organization isn't.
He won't go away.
He's still around. They started this organization really with the idea of shifting the priorities of the Democratic Party. And I should say, I mean, they were around starting in 1985, early 1985 is when they were officially founded. But when they really gained power is in the aftermath of, is in the late 80s, early 90s, when Bill Clinton becomes their figurehead. And he becomes critical to the success of the Democratic Leadership Council, and they actually become really critical to his push for national power. So it's this combination. And one of their big things, I should say, is they really believed that one of the things the Democratic Party needed to do was to focus on the presidency, that for the Democrats to gain power, that meant focusing on winning presidential elections. And so I think that's actually shaped party policy in various different ways. Another critical part of their philosophy, of their strategy, was about that the party was too focused on trying to kind of win over marginalized groups, or especially what they were really focused on is they thought that the Democratic Party had become too beholden to special interest groups, meaning groups of color, women, and especially unions. So a big part of their strategy was to shift the kind of the traditionally tight relationship of the Democratic Party to unions and move towards other groups, and especially focus on moderate suburbanites, and also build ties with industry and other types of groups. So that's the kind of strategy part. And I don't want to go on too long. I can answer the other part, was that their philosophy was. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
How are they different from the New Dems, and how are they different from the Blue Dogs, who were a caucus in Congress? Are these sort of the same people?
It's the same groups as the New Democrats. And so in some ways they're not, the Blue Dogs are slightly different, I mean, in some ways, that's much more about sort of tactical strategy. I mean, this is actually a sort of more philosophical. It is a philosophical ideology, but they define themselves as New Democrats, and so that's really part of their vision, that they're kind of reshaping who the Democratic Party is, and shifting in that direction. And so those terms sort of become synonymous with one another.
I remember reading. I can't remember where, but there was something sort of it was just sort of passively suggested that, around the time when the Democrats, the official Democratic Party, really purged unions from membership and replaced it with lobbyists because of quote unquote, you have to keep up with the Republicans in terms of funding. I also remember reading that the DLC took some Koch brother money. Is that correct?
I'm not sure. I didn't come across that. They did get a lot of. They got money from Michael Steinhardt, so private equity money was critical to the founding of their public policy institute. I actually think one of the things I came to there, and so the interesting thing with the story of the DLC, and this gets where it gets a little bit weedsy, or inside baseball. Some of those ties come later, like in the 2000s, as they're kind of shifting their origins. So I actually found in the early days they were less kind of pro. It wasn't the sort of unabashedly pro business that sometimes they get associated with. In many of what the book looks at actually is what they tried to do is their philosophy, which was this idea of kind of using market and economic growth as a means to address kind of traditional liberal ideals. So they still believe, I mean, this is one of the core questions I had is like, why are these people Democrats? So like, what makes them still part of the Democratic Party? Like what's different than being a Republican? And I think that there's still a commitment to certain ideas of equality. They have unlike kind of so in some ways, what I argue in the book is what they represent as kind of a democratic version of neoliberalism that's different than distinctive from the kind of traditional story of neoliberalism of someone like Milton Friedman or Ronald Reagan, who believe in very limited government or no government. I mean, kind of letting the market for the sake of the market. And this is more of belief in there's still a role for government, and the government kind of is a catalyst to help the private sector do the work that was once done by government. So they still believe in sort of helping
public-private partnership.
Absolutely. So a huge part of their, yes, exactly. So it's a huge part of their vision is public-private partnerships, and kind of, and so one of the core founding principle, or what they turn into their kind of philosophy, is this idea of you expand opportunity, not government. So that's done through things like through market growth, public-private partnerships, and all of those kinds of mechanisms, and also bringing in market principles to make government more efficient. So it's a lot of these kinds of overlaps between government and the private sector, and sort of solidifying those relationships, but it's not the full Friedman version of sort of ending government. I mean, I don't like literally ending government, but sort of it's not like a libertarian view of like the market itself can sort of is all powerful and can do everything.
Well, what baffles me about this is, by the time Clinton takes power, and even by the time the DLC really materializes, the model of like, from what I understand, the model of PPP or, basically putting government on credit through bonds, et cetera, it was already failed. It failed in New York, Ford's famous line. And later on, as it continued, failed in Detroit, it failed in Buffalo, it failed in New Orleans, Puerto Rico famously, then Greece, Argentina, but they just kept going. They just kept saying, no, it's going to work this time. Am I missing something? It was like...
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, so that this, like, what is not acknowledged as kind of what's not working, and like what the limits of the private sector can do. And I think that there's, in this moment, I think there's someone like, so who Clinton brings in first as his senior economic advisor, and then as Treasury Secretary is Robert Rubin, who's someone who has basically directly contributed to the kind of growth of Wall Street, of things like the bond market, and understanding that, and believes believes in those tools to address these other kinds of solutions. So I think there is this kind of firm faith in the powers of the market without kind of a recognition of some of these other types of questions or failures that have come in. And there's an idea that you can kind of mitigate that too. I mean, I think that they're not going for it's not the Ford, you're on your own to New York. There is some way of like, we will help, we will sort of create the kind of middle ground area. And then the other part that's really critical, and the book looks at extensively, a lot of the program that one of the final programs that Clinton institutes, this idea of new markets, of sort of treating, of opening up and showing to private companies the power of that sort of poor communities are good investments. And so like that's the kind of public-private partnership too, of like bringing in new kinds of investment.
So let's get to that for a second, because I'm old enough to remember when the housing market collapsed. I was shocked the other day when I was on air with somebody and they were talking about how they were 12 years old during Obama's first election. I was like, oh, okay. I was like,
I know. Since teaching college students, it's really, I've started to feel just really aged. The things that they don't do and don't remember blows my mind. But it's kind of incredible.
Like, that was a minute ago.
That the financial crisis is something that they're like vaguely aware of, but have not. It wasn't.
I'm like, we're still at it. Well, it's like when they go after millennials. Sorry, guys, if I'm offending half the audience here, but it's like when they go after millennials as being so out of touch. I'm like, we never even got our day in this. Like, what are you doing? We're still in it. Anyways, the housing collapse, way back in the day, and Lehman Brothers, of course, that is absolutely an effect of Clintonian policies, and during the 2016 election, it was brought up a lot with Elizabeth Warren because she challenged Hillary Clinton on some of these policies, explicitly, because Hillary was in the Senate at the time. So can you? And I don't want to confuse Hillary and Bill's policies either. It was just they kind of got brought up at the same time. But what went underway with HUD?
How did this happen? So, I mean, it's in some ways like someone described this book as like you're watching like a slow moving crash as you end up into the housing crisis and the financial crisis. And I think that is this critical question of and like I will be clear, I don't think that was what they were like intending to happen. Like it wasn't like, oh, we will do all this and then we'll have this huge housing crisis. Or fully understood at the time what was going on. But I think this goes to this question of what happens when you try to use the market in various different ways to do good and to solve problems. And the two key pieces that lead to that Clinton era policies contributed to that lead to the kind of financial and housing crisis have to do with a couple of things. I mean, one is the broader architecture or landscape that I was talking about of kind of trying to bring in corporations to kind of do the work of government. One thing that does is opens poor people up to and low-income people up to predation in various different ways, but also with the idea at the bigger level, the idea of kind of that the private sector can replace the welfare state, which is a lot what was going on, so that you replace them, and the famous one is welfare to work, that you can replace what was traditionally, you can, instead of having support, you can have jobs or entrepreneurial programs or various different other things like that. That left people in a much, much more vulnerable position. So those are like the groundwork for it, but the actual policies with HUD are two different programs. One, Clinton opened up a program of the National Homeownership Strategy, which was a big idea that like homeownership was down, but that there's all this kind of power in getting people to own homes, and so established a program to encourage more home ownership amongst groups that had been sort of traditionally left out of the housing market for a variety of different reasons. And so this is, in some ways like sort of going after. And so it's almost reverse redlining in various different ways. But at the same time that was going on, I mean, in this kind of big program to kind of help people purchase homes and make that more available and sort of ease the processes through which and the sort of bureaucratic red tape that could happen. There was all of these critical changes to the sort of basic financial infrastructure through deregulation, and the critical piece of that is the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act, the going into and then in the various different things with credit derivatives. Some of which Clinton has walked back after to understand what happened, but this sort of reshaped the economic landscape such that it enabled the kind of in many ways lay the groundwork for what happens a decade later. And I will say it's not just I don't think that the Clinton administration is like the solely to blame for the financial crisis and the mortgage crisis. I think that the subsequent policies only fully exacerbated it and took away remove some of the other kinds of programs that Democrats had put into place. But I do think it is critical for understanding some of the basic infrastructure that did lead it to happen. And because of the fact that under the Clinton, during the Clinton era, so many of the kind of basic systems of traditional welfare were really taken away, or the social safety net. It left people in like a far more vulnerable position when the financial crisis happened. And so that also leads to things like the combination of things like also the promotion of globalization, NAFTA. Like there's a variety of different factors that kind of took away some of that critical social safety net. And I really do think the last, now it's more than a decade, but the last 14 years have been very much sort of seeing that part play out in I guess, a fast-moving train crash.
It's interesting. So folks who watch my show know that I've been doing a documentary on Puerto Rico, and I'm reading a book right now. And just today, I was reading this one part where there was a tax law, a tax incentive law that had been on the island for 40 years at that point in the 90s. And it was 2 years after NAFTA was passed that Bill Clinton repealed, because it comes from the federal level, repealed the tax law, but he was very reluctant to do so. And I was, this is a left writer, I was very surprised to read that he was reluctant to do so. Because, and let me be clear, that tax law was good because it provided jobs. So what happens now is people just go there, they don't pay taxes, and they don't have to do anything. They're just literally like, it's like a fire sale on the island. But he repealed it for many reasons. And in the book, it kind of went through the conversations that were happening internally, that it's now been, released. I say this because I wonder, you say some of this was not necessarily the intention, but some of it, I also know Harold Hickey's political beliefs to this day. It's very confusing to me how, in some ways, it doesn't seem like it may have been a solution. Okay, like let's take this on good faith. Like their solution to deregulation of Reagan era policy, like their complete, goal to eliminate the government, Reagan's crew. They always talk about incrementalism, but at the end of the day, okay, if this is about incrementalism, then why would you be so obsessed with debt? Why would you be so obsessed with this concept of like, we can't have a safety net? You can look to Europe and say, we can do both things. We can still believe in the private market and have a social safety net, because that's how most of modern day Europe operates. I don't understand where the good faith is and where the political philosophy is.
Yeah, and I think, this is a core question. So I think in some ways, like one of the things I really wanted to argue, and in many ways the book is written to this like understandings to give a kind of more nuanced view to some degree, because I think there's a really easy way the very cynical way is like, this was all just strategy, and this was strategy to win elections, and also to preserve power, to give power to particular kinds of groups. I think there was some strategy in it. So it's not to say that it wasn't like they were operating within this like frictionless world where there wasn't like a very powerful Republican Party who was increasingly gaining power, and they were having to operate and understand that process. But I think there was also this way, and so this goes to the question of like, because in some ways you could say like the outcome is still the financial crisis. The outcome is still Puerto Rico being in a extraordinarily difficult position. But I think like to the point, I don't know the exact policy, but from looking at what Bill Clinton what I understand of his philosophy was the idea that like by repealing the taxes, that would bring more business, which would be good for the people of Puerto Rico.
Right.
So instead of
he
sort
was
of
struggling
thinking
with it.
He struggled probably, yeah. I think
that's what I was really shocked by. I thought his philosophy would have been like, go for it, take the island.
No, and I think there is this constant thing of like, what is good for, I think he did genuinely believe in trying to help people in various different ways. So it wasn't just like, we're going to like come in and it's going to be a bonanza for private corporations and, and this is going to be sort of where the Democratic Party is. I think there was still a belief that like, what is best for people, like, that's the part that sort of maintains the traditional aspects of the Democratic Party and liberalism to it, but thinking about those in a new way. And I think the intent is really important to understand, because it actually, like, in sort of thinking about good intentions, like that can obscure actually the harms that it does, and understanding that oftentimes things that have certain types of intentions like actually do have serious harm, especially because these become reproduced all the time. And I think things like tax breaks are a critical one. The number of different, like every president has tried a certain version of things like opportunity zones or empowerment zones, and they have
Puerto Rico.
yes, exactly,
like
absolutely. And so that's
crazy.
like, I mean, I mean, these are ones that sort of ricochet too, because they're tried abroad, they're tried at home, and they just have like routinely not worked, but there's still a faith in that idea. And so I think that's the thing that I really want to understand and make other people understand, like what was the thinking behind this, and why is there such a sort of commitment to it. And I think that I do think the Democratic Party has changed. I mean, I don't think the Biden administration has the same kind of like blind faith. They've understood some of these policies are not doing what they were supposed to do.
Right.
So that is like a sort of way. But I think that there's always the sort of, this is always there. And there's always the sort of questions of sort of when the Democratic Party adopts this kind of thinking.
There's so much to this book. I mean, I would love to have you back on to discuss more, everything from charter schools, because that's a very big part of the Democratic Party's, pull away from teachers union, largest union workforce, largest public sector workforce. And now we see our next guest is going to talk about this, how the Republican Party is using every opportunity to go after teachers, which is a much bigger story, to, the basically the predatory nature of these policies, and what happens when you get in bed with credit companies and big banks, and obviously long-term effect. But this is an incredible, really, it's very well done, very well done. I highly recommend people check it out. Love to have you back on if you're open to it.
I would be delighted to. Thank you so much. It was incredibly interesting, and I look forward to your documentary on Puerto Rico too, because I think it's such a critical topic. So
2 years from now when it comes out.
Well, I will have my eyes up, but I would be happy to come back anytime. And thank you
so
for
much.
engaging and talking with me about the book.
Go check out Left Behind, the Democrats' failed attempt to solve inequality. I think we all know that by now. Lily Geismer, it is out. Go check it out wherever you buy your books. It is from Public Affairs Books. Go check it out now. It's a great read. Great. All right, we will be right back after this break. Guys, I don't know if you know, but we are on all of the podcast platforms. David figured it out. I didn't really know that we weren't on all of them, but thank goodness we have a great team that understands these things, because I just read the news like crazy and then talk about it. That's pretty much my role. Other than that, I am clueless. But you can go check out the Nomiki Show on all the podcast platforms. You pick them. You can listen to the same show on every single platform if you want. You can rate them on every, I don't know. People do a lot of crazy things. But if you are really into our show and you are able to do so, please join us on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. It is so important that we have a patron system community, because that's what keeps the show going. When the algorithms play games, we have been all over the place, the algorithms, over the last 2 years, as I'm sure you've seen. But if you join us on patreon.com, starting at $5 a month, there are all different levels. If you have been a patron and you can no longer afford to, or you want to go down a level, or you want to take a break, let us know. Email us at thenomikishow@gmail.com. We will work something out, because the patron family is so important to us. And if you can afford to sponsor another patron, you're an incredible person. But really, this is independent media. I don't think folks understand how much work goes into this, or maybe you do, and just how hard it is to keep going. I mean, especially with the way that the algorithms are working, newer shows are not hitting. They're just not hitting the mark the way that they did a few years ago. It was a little bit easier to start up a new show, but we've been doing it because of our patrons. It's kept us going. And if you are a patron and you listen to us on Patreon, which you probably are right now, make sure to throw in your questions because we're going to be doing a Q&A coming up. I'm going to be answering all your questions. Just, as long as it's not like some sort of whatever the latest like right-wing Russia people are doing. I'm just kidding. Every time I open up my phone, I'm like, oh, more bots. There we go. Oh, 2 followers. Thanks. I'm just kidding. I know you all are fully aware of what's going on. Always grateful to everybody for tuning in, for listening and joining us on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Alison Collins is back. Alison is the former Board of Education Commissioner for the San Francisco Unified School District and recently went through a recall, which is really about something a little bit more. Alison, so great to see you again.
Nice to see you too. I really appreciate the opportunity to come back.
So Alison, I loved our conversation before. Just for folks, can you remind us what happened to you? And then we can get into like what's really behind it.
Yeah, well, I guess this past month, there was a vote in San Francisco. I'm one of 7 school board members, or was one of 7 school board members. And 3 of us were recently recalled in an unprecedented recall election in San Francisco. As a result, there's the media or the, I guess, the recallers were charging that we didn't open schools soon enough, and there were concerns around, fiscal responsibility. There's a lot of different things that were raised as concerns, but I think primarily COVID, not opening schools soon enough. And one other thing that was really unprecedented is that they were able to raise about $2 million to initiate the recall, and it was successful. But as I mentioned in a previous, when we talked earlier, this is actually something that's happening nationally, and we're seeing an unprecedented number of recalls happening across the country. But as a progressive, in quotes, city, it was pretty unique, to see this happen in a city that supposedly is, really progressive.
Why did they choose you 3 on the board?
Well, there's a lot of theories. 3 of us are people of color. Let's just start there. And you have me and former President Gabriela Lopez, Black and Latinx women, also very progressive and talk a lot about race and white supremacy culture. So, it's not just about skin color. It's also about folks who are willing to address racism and systemic racism, actually not just photo ops, but actually we were changing systems in the district. So President Lopez authored a resolution to actually focus on Latinx community members. I and her collaborated on a resolution to open up enrollment in one of our most segregated elite high schools, where there's a lot of anti-Black racism, and Black students have had protested. We actually worked with those students, a Black and Latinx student representative, to address this kind of decades old issue in our city around a high school. And that also in San Francisco specifically, it's kind of a third rail. You don't mess with selective enrollment at some of these high schools. But as I said, I'm seeing this across the country. You see this at Boston Latin. In Boston, there was another controversy around school commissioners there, or around opening up enrollment there. But really all these is about really changing systems, really folks who are changing the system. And I think a lot of us ran when Trump was in office. You saw a wave of new people running for office that had not been regular politicians. We were, people of color, progressive folks, and people who, working class folks, labor, oriented folks running for office. And what we're seeing now nationally is a backlash of, the right wing is reorganizing itself and trying to take back, remove people from office, remove progressive education policies as well, as you're seeing with anti-CRT and anti-gay and transgender, policies. They're trying to, push it back and erase the progress that we've made.
It seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, and obviously every state is different, but California has this unique recall system. But it seems to me that they're kind of preying on these laws, these democratic laws in place through low turnout elections in which they can, through $2 million, basically turn out fearmonger folks into showing up for something that if, say, it was in a presidential year, it wouldn't have passed. Is that correct?
It's hard to say, honestly, but for sure when I ran, and President Lopez ran, we did not, and also our colleague, Commissioner Maliga ran, we all ran really community-based campaigns. And that's kind of how San Francisco runs. It is a city. We're like an international city, and yet we're not very large. There's only around 800,000 people. So when you compare us to Chicago or New York, we're small. And so people can run, it's a citywide campaign, but you can do it for about $40,000. And it's, so it's kind of a mix,
wow.
To run a citywide campaign. But so just, the amount of money though that flowed into this campaign was unprecedented. $2 million for one election, when in the past 4 years, all of us collectively combined, anybody who ran in the last 4 years raised maybe $1 million. So what you saw was just a flooding of the airwaves, mailers. And we're seeing this now with Chesa Boudin. He's our district attorney. And I do believe it's interesting. There's a lot of crossover. I also want to say the money isn't just the mailers. It's also it's like a ground war. They hired a Texas-based company to come in and gather signatures. And in that process, what you're doing, if you know anything about community organizing, and I'm a community organizer, you get a petition going. Part of that is engaging the community in conversation and getting their name and contact information so you can start, sharing information about what you want to talk about. And so they went out and across the city, and it was, you would see recall Chesa Boudin and recall the school board kind of at the same table. And the messaging in both cases, it's okay if you don't agree, but some of the information was just flat out untrue.
Yeah.
But you have these one-on-one folks who are literally paid to collect signatures, not from San Francisco, from Texas, right? They don't know anything about our school board. They're not parents. There were volunteers, but when you have that kind of money to pay people to gather signatures citywide, you're also you're able to drive a narrative. And then, we just didn't have the capacity to respond to that because we were doing our jobs, and as I said before, we're volunteers. So, my colleague, President Lopez, she works at University of San Francisco, helping to, mentor new teachers, right? My other colleague, Commissioner Maliga, is a full-time social worker. So we don't have staff, we don't have PR firms. And what they were able to set up in San Francisco is several different nonprofits, which based on new laws in California, you can't even look up who's giving them money, right?
Wow.
You had several different parent reopener groups, where people were getting full salaries And then they're working with people who are paid political consultants that have expertise working with previous, like the mayor, state legislators. They know how to run political campaigns, being paid. And so also this $2 million, I think people need to understand, it becomes its own economy, right?
Right.
So people are kind of creating their own jobs, to run campaigns, and they're getting paid quite well, to do it. I was paid a $500 stipend every month, and I got health insurance, whereas you had one of the former failed school board candidates was running a campaign and getting, I think, $100,000 to run a signature gathering campaigons. So it's just, there's no way to.
And of course the money is not, it's mostly coming from outside interests that are exercising these campaigns in different forms and with different messaging all over the country. What is their end game? Is it like just to annihilate teachers unions and privatize schools? Is that kind of what they're? Well, I think you're using culture war, but it seems like it's really about something else.
Yeah. Well, San Francisco, I think what's interesting is you have a national kind of a context, right? Like, I don't think any of this would have happened without COVID, which is hugely destabilizing, right? I don't think any of this would have happened if there wasn't a national kind of, I spoke with Dr. Grayson, and he immediately made the connection between the recall effort here, the recalls across the country, and the January 6th insurrection, right? There's this take back our country kind of energy happening. But then on a local level, you see nationally, every town has their own issues, right? And in San Francisco, we have specific battles that are going on, and power war, power plays between different political factions, people who want to see more development or less development, or more, tenant rights, or, those battles are constantly going on in City Hall. And so the school board is a conduit, people get on the school board to then run for higher office. And so who's on the school board? Now we have a mayoral appointed school board, predominantly mayoral appointed school board in San Francisco, because two of our previous, we've had other candidates who were appointed. And so out of 7 members, now 4 of those members have been appointed by the mayor.
Wow.
So then that gives the mayor, and you look at other cities, you look at Bloomberg, she was a mayor who supported Bloomberg in the election. You look at Bloomberg mayors, you've got New York is going through, talk to some New York teachers, right?
Oh yeah.
Right. And there's in that, they don't vote for school board members in New York.
No, we don't.
In Boston, they don't vote for school board members. They are appointed by the mayor. In Chicago, they just won kind of the right to vote for their, representatives, representation over the school board. So there's been a move in San Francisco. The mayor has been very clear that she wants to have a say in how we do things. And so in effect, and there are people who are saying they want that too. There tend to be more conservative, voices in our city, but whether she was progressive or moderate, there's this idea of mayoral control, and who dictates who's on the school board is also kind of dictating who's going to potentially get into City Hall and be a city supervisor. And then, that dictates how our city sets its budget around policing. And then this is where it all, and this relates to the teachers union and all the unions in our city, right? Because unions know how to organize and they work in solidarity. So the teachers union works with, other unions in our city, right? And so that's where it becomes part of a larger, for our city, a larger kind of power play about, and funding for police is a big deal. And that's why Chesa Boudin, our city attorney, is now also under fire for trying to, tackle some of the criminal justice issues. And he's very progressive. And so folks that are pro Police Officers Association, don't like him. And so that's, but it's the same. There's a lot of crossover. There are some differences, but there is a lot of crossover in our city between that, the criminal justice, police support, and then also development interests.
Right.
And so that's why we see the Realtors Association dropped a lot of money. The Chamber of Commerce which has a lot of Republican members. You can people say there aren't any Republicans in San Francisco. That's not true.
Right.
But, people aren't as loud about it. And so.
Which, that's an interesting point, because I am thinking, San Francisco is a very wealthy city. The inequality is it's right there with New York. You have a housing crisis in San Francisco as well. You have a homeless crisis. It's been going on for a long time, as we do in New York as well. But there's this other aspect that I guess we have it in New York through like a little bit of tech and a lot of finance, but there's the tech culture that really it's like in your face in San Francisco. And that's, there's a lot of libertarianism that's running through. So how much does like when you're canvassing in supposedly very progressive San Francisco, are you like hit in the face with this libertarian kind of mindset through tech culture?
I think that's a really good question. And it's not in the streets, not in the communities, but online and in the media. And so it's really, San Francisco's changing too.
Yeah.
Because of gentrification. I moved here over 20 years ago because it reminded me of growing up in a part of LA that was very diverse and economically diverse. And just like where I grew up doesn't look the same.
Right.
It doesn't look the same here. And parts of, we had a very, more representation for, we have maybe 3% Black folks. When I moved here, it was like 12%. And in our school district, it was 25%. Latinx community is being pushed out now. So it's hard to say, our city is getting whiter and more affluent in some respects. And at the same time, our school district isn't, right? So we are focused, as a school board member, you're focused on the children that you serve. 70% of white families put their kids in private school.
Okay.
So just like, there's white flight, and it happened when the district integrated schools, there was white flight like there was everywhere, and it stayed. So there's a disconnect between, you had a lot of maybe people who weren't parents or private school parents voting. A school board election is just anybody votes. So, but our goal was to really be listening to constituents. So me and Gabriella and Fogo, all of us were very focused on that. It's hard to say, I know my constituents, I know public school families, I know educators. It's hard to say. I do think that there's definitely an overrepresentation of tech interests and these kind of, folks who are coming to San Francisco, new to the city. A lot of the things you're seeing in New York. They move to the Mission because it's cool, and get a condo and then complain about the noise. Just like we're seeing it in Oakland nationally. Yeah. And so, to some degree, I think that's where the COVID piece comes in. You have parents who maybe weren't involved in our public education system. All of a sudden, meetings are online. They're hearing we're changing names of some schools that were named after slave owners, or we're doing anti-racist curriculum. And they're thinking, they're maybe coming from places that were, they're not as invested and involved in the day-to-day, Yeah. And so I think that's happening nationally as well. People are like, what? You're teaching what? You're teaching about, it's okay to be trans. I don't like that. And so then that's where you see this kind of backlash of folks who maybe previously weren't as involved are getting more involved. But their voices are maybe louder disproportionately than they should be based on representation. If that
maybe
makes
they should turn off Fox News. And maybe Facebook, and channel their anger not towards their teachers, but and maybe not towards like Congress, like literally storming it, but maybe the companies that are really exacerbating these issues.
I do want to say something too about Facebook. What I've learned is I'm a very social mom. I started blogging as a mom blogger, educator, and it was a way for me to build community and share information. Right. What I'm seeing now is that Facebook is becoming a place to basically radicalize parents. because there were parent groups that started forming, and if you didn't agree, or if you said, hey, this sounds anti-union, I like teachers, parents would tell me they'd get kicked out of the group. And so you have a lot of these echo chambers happening,
right,
where parents are organizing, and then you have WeChat is a place where the Asian American community, and if you know anybody who knows about propaganda and this radicalization that's happening, you know, within that community, there is a similar element of that. And then on Twitter, you have Twitter bots. As you know, there's a lot of fake people online, and there's targeted harassment. And so, people get on block lists and they get ratioed and all these things that, I don't even understand. Most folks think that they're engaging in an authentic space.
Right.
And with the pandemic, we rely on these spaces. There are public meeting spaces. We're not going to the park, talking to our neighbors. We're online. And I think that also is a whole other aspect, I think, of this.
And what it does is it serves the purpose of silencing dissent, and oftentimes those who really need to have a voice are people of color, women, our sisters and brothers in marginalized communities across the board. And it's number one, it's aggressively going after people so that they don't feel comfortable speaking up, but then it's also shifting the algorithm so that they're not even showing up in a feed. And on top of it, when you're seeing so much misinformation, it places doubt in people's minds. I mean, just a quick little story, yesterday, I showed up in a Reddit site, someone sent it to me and I was like, oh my God. And people were like, yeah, Nomi's a lib, Nomi's lib. I'm like, what, when if I showed you I'm a lib? Like it was, but then I realized it's just because people say it enough that they start to think, oh yeah, well, she's just like, she just thinks this way or whatever. And it can be, some of it was like real misinformation. And these are good, these were people who were real, who just were seeing the misinformation spread enough that it was doubt placed in their minds. So I know I've seen it online with you. And I think it's really important that you keep, if you're able to keep speaking out about it, because that's the only way to counter the messaging, I guess, at this point.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I just recently spoke with Isaac Kamala, and I do think he would be a great person for you to have on the show. He's done research on these information attacks that happened at the college level, and what you start to see when you learn about something, then all of a sudden you see it everywhere, right?
Oh yeah.
And he really has drilled down into these attacks on professors in college campuses. And the whole infrastructure that existed around them and still exists to basically get them out of the universities, and then also to promote, ideas that really don't have merit. But it's that is now happening at all levels. And so, you're aware of this as far as just mainstream media. What gets promoted, what doesn't get promoted. How do stories get chosen? And then some things are not even stories, really, right? But there's enough juice behind them, or,
Hunter Biden. I think I wasted my morning yesterday talking about that on the news, being like, really? And that's what we're talking about. We all
have to talk about it, right? And then it's a story. And so that is happening. And there's this pipeline, too, of get trolls to talk about it.
That's right.
Start a fake blog site, pretend to be real. And then eventually it's in the Chronicle. So I think what you're doing is so important. This is so important because people can get actual information, right? You don't have to agree, but there's so much false information out there, and it really is impacting. I saw, don't agree with me. If you don't agree that we should change the name of a high school, let's talk about it. Mm-hmm. But there's some stuff there was stuff floating around. It was just, and it prevented me from actually serving families and doing a job, right? And so that is a real disservice to just how our system works, and then also to our democracy. And so anyway, I just really appreciate this show. And also, I do think we need to get more media savvy and media literate so we can see the red flags, because 100%. Now that I see it, I knew, okay, if it's on the news, it's not always true, but the level of intentional kind of disinformation and manipulation that's going on around electoral politics and policy in our country is just off the charts.
It's beyond, like, Congress needs to have hearings. I mean, this is it's so deep, it's so entrenched. Where we could do a whole other show on that one. Alison, thank you again for joining us. We're really grateful for all the work that you've done and have been doing. And, I hope we can keep this conversation going, and we're here with you. We support you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your support. And I just want to say too, I know there's just hearing you speak about the union and teachers themselves. I talk to them all the time. It is so hard right now, and just really appreciate your support to educators, and just I'm really grateful.
Thank you so much. All right. Support your teachers. All right, guys, we'll be right back after this quick break with the one and only Jamie Peck. Welcome back. We have Jamie Peck here. Jamie Peck is, of course, the host of the Antifada and Everybody Loves Communism podcast. Jamie, what's up? How you doing?
I'm better than I have been in a minute.
That's a good thing, a good measure.
I'm still a little bit sick, but yeah, I just had a string of really bad luck in Mexico where I got COVID and then I got a stomach infection. And apparently, according to my doctor, the stomach infection probably made me less able to get all the way better from the COVID. So I still feel kind of crappy, but I am on the mend and I'm alive, which is the most important thing.
The only times I've ever had stomach infections, like real ones, like the kinds where like the wormings in you, is in Mexico. 2 times. One, I shared some food with somebody. That person ended up in the hospital for 3 weeks. In major, like really, really, really bad. For me, it was just like, I didn't understand how sick I was for 3 weeks. So, but they were like they ate more of what we ate at the shared table in Tulum. I don't know what you did, but obviously don't drink the water and be careful with the seafood. And people, it's just because we have different systems. Like our stomachs are used to our water here. It's not like one's worse than the other. They all suck.
People don't drink Mexico City residents don't drink the water either because it makes them sick too. But sometimes some of it sneaks in there somehow. I don't know.
Something.
Yeah.
Let's
what they stop need to do? Thinking about it.
Chlorine in their water like they do with us. We're just glowing. You think this is a purple background? It's not. It's just me. All right, guys. So where do we want to start here? Oh, there's so many things. What's a good little
oh boy. I have not been following the news, I must admit, because I've been buried very deep in a 100-year-old text by Lenin, which is the thing I recorded on this week. And before that, I was just like on the bathroom floor in a Mexico City Airbnb. So let's hopefully.
All right. We'll start with easy stuff. I think you'll be able to do well. Let's start with Santa Claus. How about that? Santa Claus is running for Congress. Santa Claus is a member of he's a Democratic Socialist, I guess. I didn't know this. I thought he was a capitalist, frankly, because he was forcing all the, well, no, he gives it for free. So word is that Sarah Palin's running for Congress in Alaska, and there is
my God,
guy named Santa Claus.
That's so funny.
I know, I just can't. I saw it and I was like, this is too much fun. Let's put that up on screen.
Tonight's Fact or Fiction, we're looking into a nugget that has people doing a double take. Sarah Palin got a lot of media attention last week when she announced her candidacy for Alaska's congressional seat. She joins a field of 50 other candidates, which includes Santa Claus. And that's no joke. Santa Claus, which is his legal name, is a two-term councilman and current mayor pro tem of the city of North Pole, Alaska. He describes himself as a democratic socialist in the mold of Bernie Sanders. Before changing his name from Thomas O'Connor, Claus held a number of jobs, including special assistant to the deputy police commissioner of New York.
What?
Wait.
What?
That last
Hang
part
on.
is weird.
Let's Google that one. Let's. I was like really into him until he was the deputy assistant. Okay, I'm Googling him.
I had to throw that one in there. It's like a real milkshake duck situation, you know. We regret to inform you that Santa Claus is a cop.
It's a cop. Thomas O'Connor. But this is okay, so this is interesting. I mean, obviously he's Santa Claus and he is an elected official, so that's interesting. He's got some experience in North Pole. What?
You know, I'm really looking forward to Sarah Palin having to run against him, but still walk the line of not wanting to tell children that Santa Claus isn't real. She's just going to have to, she's going to be like, oh, Mr. Claus, don't you know we should give no one health care and kill the gays?
No free goodies for you. Everybody wants free things. Oh my God. Maybe Santa Claus is who we needed this whole time. We just needed to burst everybody's bubble and force them into saying things like, no, free things are good. Maybe that's it.
Yeah. I mean, I think Bernie boiled that message down pretty well, but you know, maybe Santa Claus can boil it down even further. Maybe maybe he's the messenger that this country really needs.
But I am a little concerned that Thomas, previous Santa Claus, like before he was Santa Claus, before he transitioned to Santa Claus, I don't know what he was Thomas O'Connor, deputy commissioner of the NYPD. I'm like, was he really a Bernie supporter? Is he really DSA? Did something happen? Did he evolve? Or is he pulling a Joe Rogan? Because I do want to get to Joe Rogan too. Joe Rogan, who was a Bernie supporter, but also maybe a Nazi. I don't know. I'm starting to feel a little
tepid Bernie supporter of all time, by the way.
That's a very respectful way of saying it.
Yeah.
Okay, like he is now having a hissy fit because it gets him attention, in my opinion, that he will quit Spotify if he has to walk on eggshells. Oh my God, this
no.
So entitled. I don't know if you can hear that.
Wow.
How about, instead of cancellation, how about shadow banning him? That would be fun. Love to see all the platforms do that and see how he really feels. Or is that beyond his vocabulary? Seriously. All right. I just had to throw that in there because I can't stand him. So speaking of Nazi-aligned people, Peter Thiel is having a meltdown because like when billionaires fight, it's fascinating. I love seeing the dynamics. First off, what does Peter Thiel represent to you, Jamie? Because I don't think people know enough about him. I know you do.
Yeah. I mean, what is he? He is the world's most boring vampire. He was a big investor in PayPal. That's how he made all his money. And wait, was he invested in Facebook too? I forget. But the thing that he's really known for in my circles is his company Palantir, which sells military technology to ICE that they basically use to surveil and terrorize immigrants at the border. There's all kinds of uses for that too, but that's like the best known use of it. It's also probably being used to surveil US citizens as we speak. It's being used for all kinds of evil shit that they don't have to tell us about.
Right. And he's a big specifically Bitcoin supporter. And he's having a meltdown right now, Peter Thiel, because he thinks that Jamie Dimon, Larry Fink, and Warren Buffett, the finance gerontocracy, are preventing Bitcoin from reaching $100,000.
Oh, wow.
And he called Warren Buffett the sociopathic grandpa. Let's roll this clip because this is just like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's juicy, but I also it freaks me out a lot.
Give it to me.
What exactly is Peter Thiel saying, and what is the bigger picture around his comments? Is he just long Bitcoin and talking his book?
Hey, Manus. Well, he's a provocative guy. He often makes provocative comments. So in a way, this is no surprise, but he is definitely playing to the crowd at this Bitcoin conference, right? They want to hear about how great Bitcoin is. They get very excited about it. This has been the case, at that conference for multiple years. So him saying, we could have this great thing going on that works. I mean, Thiel is kind of funny. He's saying there's this financial gerontocracy with a 66-year-old involved. Thiel is 54. So he's not that much younger than the people he's talking about. But one other interesting aspect, of course, is that Thiel is helping Trump-affiliated candidates in the U.S. midterm elections. You had Warren Buffett, who endorsed Hillary Clinton in 2016. You have Diamond and Fink, who were critical of the people who went into the House on January 6th in the U.S. with those protests. So it may also be people that he, kind of sees as problematic, and he may want to set up this narrative for more reasons. So that's one thing to be looking at as well. That
Oh my God. So, okay, this woman is like really talk about walking on eggshells. She's like, those people who went into the Capitol, visited the Capitol, might be aligned with them. Oh my God. So Peter Thiel, what's so interesting when you look into him is he started doing this. His political philosophy was in college. Like he was hardcore libertarian, extreme conservative. He was involved in organizing and writings. I mean, you can really go back and find the roots of his political philosophy. Except against gay people because he is gay, and that's his, maybe that's why he's libertarian and not like a fundamentalist or something. But she does have a
buddies with Trump.
A little bit.
He's friends with those people.
Yeah, and a lot of the like cryptocurrency inner circle, the Brock Pierces and the former John McAfee's before he died. They were all very close to Trump. They were on his inaugural committee. And I don't know. I mean, there's more to this like cryptocurrency craze that I think folks aren't really understanding, and that it does have roots in like crypto fascist communities.
Yeah. So I think the reason why all of these libertarians are so obsessed with cryptocurrency is because one thing that we still need the state to do is what gives value to money. And if you are a capitalist, and all of these people are, because libertarianism is just private tyranny on the part of capitalists, then that concerns you, right? So if you can kind of get around the need for the immense power of, say, the American war machine to back the value of your money, and the fact that they collect taxes in that currency, et cetera, then you've gone a decent way towards achieving your goals of, making the state sort of defunct. So I think that's why they're also obsessed with it. I don't think it's going to work, and it makes me laugh whenever I see it take a dive or something else embarrassing happens. You can't really blame that on Warren Buffett, I don't think, although maybe he did something I don't know about. It's gambling. And like there are lots of tests of, is this money or not? One of which is, can you pay your taxes in it? Can you go to the bodega and use Bitcoin to buy a banana? Maybe in San Francisco, but still in most places, the answer is no. So I'm really not afraid of it. And I think it's funny.
I mean, they have lobbyists all over the country. I mean, Eric Adams has talked about, paying the budget in crypto. Eric Adams, do you want to hand over New York City to what was just released as, 80% of crypto is one Russian oligarch's money floating around, and not to mention the cartel money, not to mention what Chinese, who knows who has interests, in the world powers community, like in destabilizing the US dollar.
If the Russian invasion of Ukraine saves us from putting all of New York's budget into funny money, that will be a silver lining.
I don't know if it will though. I think it's like part of their warfare. It's like first it's Ukraine, then there's economic warfare. I truthfully, like, I do think that this is a big part of that folks aren't really getting is, there are a lot of folks I know even watch our show that are into crypto, and I understand like the excitement of it. I've been personally
Gambling rules.
Gambling is fun, but it's okay, it's in some ways transparent, but it's also not transparent when you're moving money through different coins and then buying houses with those coins. And instead of like an oligarch just like straight up buying a house and laundering their money through that, they're laundering it through many different economies, and they're all speculative. And so what happens when that bursts? It's much more seismic than just a housing market burst. It's much more seismic than a currency deflating. It has deep economic consequences globally. And I don't think like folks who are going to these like sexy Bitcoin conferences with like Beyonce or, Serena Williams are really getting it. It's fun. Yeah, it's cool to show up at these parties. But you know what else was really fun? Like going to tech parties 10 years ago. And how'd that go?
I mean, I don't think that any of those parties have ever been fun, but, to each their own. I mean,
you mean that naked sushi models weren't your thing? Really?
Yeah. I mean, look, I might have worked at a few of those parties, so maybe that gave me a bad impression of them. But no, what was I going to say? I mean, this seems like yet more evidence. Like we saw this with the 2008 financial crisis, right? The global capitalist economy has progressed past the point when it was profitable to invest in making things. Investors are running out of places to go. That's why they invest in increasingly silly apps whose value is purely fictitious. And we have an economy that is increasingly based on fictitious projections of future capital, increasingly built on sand. So, you can't be surprised when it goes to something like Bitcoin. And you also can't be surprised when that causes everything to implode.
It reminds me of that one app. Remember the Yo app? Remember how it like raised, I can't remember how much money. It raised like some stupid amount of money. This is maybe 10 years ago. And it was just at the height of all this. It was like, the Yo app has raised this much money. Well, what does the Yo app do? Literally all you do is say yo to each other.
Didn't it somehow get infiltrated by Nazis?
It seems like their jam. All right. I wanna just great segue. Remember that time Howard Schultz compared the former CEO of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, compared the union organizers in Buffalo to Jews riding a train into concentration camps. Remember that? Speaking of Nazis? Yeah, that was Howard Schultz.
Sorry, my podcast is bothering me and I was not listening. Can you repeat the question?
Oh, God. Speaking of Nazis,
that was a very good setup.
Actually, we should keep that in. Speaking of Nazis, remember that time former Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz compared the plight of the workers that were organizing at Starbucks to Jews on trains going to the concentration camps. Do you remember that? That was a great analogy. Great analogy. Well, he's back. He is back. They say that he saved Starbucks back in 2008. And maybe he can again if unions don't get in the way. Let's play that clip.
Springer, thank you to Jonathan Honig on this. Jonathan, what's interesting about both the Amazon and Starbucks case is their workers were paid handsomely. Now, not that should be your only draw, but between benefits and hourly wages at or around or even above $20 an hour, it does beg the question, how is this gaining so much steam?
Well, I think there's a political movement, as Dan pointed out. There's a political momentum towards organized labor. But it's sad, Neil. It's not just frustrating. It's sad because nothing's been better for the workers than people like Howard Schultz from Starbucks. Starbucks has pioneered so many benefits for their employees, basically transformed what used to be considered Mick jobs. I mean, he's the Ray Kroc of our era, Neil. Transformed the culture, created all that wealth. And I'm bullish on Starbucks, not just because they've cut the buybacks, but I'm bullish on Starbucks. Howard Schultz saved this company back in 2008. He can do it again as long as the unions don't get in the way.
But
Oh
he's
my God.
cooled it on the stock buybacks for the time being to focus on those workers. At least that was part of the announcement. So clearly what was going on at his shop, as well as Amazon, telegraphed what would be happening now, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's, the criticism of buybacks, Neil, is always that, there's no benefit. It's just financial engineering. But, Howard Schultz is cutting the buybacks because he wants to, reinvest in the company. And that's the whole point. A company like Starbucks, I mean, their success isn't guaranteed, Neil. And right now they're going to have to invest in the whole.
So we just have a couple minutes, but my takeaway is, so they're saying, Jonathan Honig is basically saying that it is good to pay workers higher. Like, isn't that a great thing that he's doing? So, okay, great. If that's the case, then why doesn't everybody do that? But obviously there's more to this. Jamie.
Okay. First of all, $20 an hour, and he's including non-money things in that, like benefits that it's not necessarily that every worker has. That's not a living wage in a lot of places. What is it in New York? It would be like $33 an hour or something.
Exactly.
That should be the minimum wage if it was a living wage. I saw you tweeting about that a while back. So like, don't act like you're doing them a huge favor by paying them like probably $15 an hour, maybe, for work that's, pretty taxing on your body. I've been a barista. And it's not the easiest thing, you might call it low skilled, but you have to stand up all day, your knees hurt, you have to deal with people and the rush and the stress, and then sometimes you have to clean out the milk jugs even though you're a vegan, and that's super, super gross. Not speaking from personal experience or anything. But where was I
people
going
before
with this?
they've had their coffee? Like, my God, that's the last thing I wanted. One time I went to I was at the airport before like 6 a.m. and it hit me like everybody was getting in fights in the line. I was like, oh my God, it's because it's so early in the morning. Nobody's had coffee. I feel so bad for everybody who has to do any sort of morning shifts. It's the worst.
Yeah. And, getting up early kind of sucks too for most people. But where was I going with this? Yeah, I mean, he's just doing the capitalist thing where he's like, "Oh, you should be grateful. Don't you trust me to take care of you?" And it's interesting because there are capitalists who at least pretend like they think unions are a good thing. Like say the entire Democratic Party, right? Joe Biden at least understands that he has to pay lip service to organized labor and sort of bring him in as this junior partner in capitalist development, which is something that only happened after workers fought and in many cases died to get unions in the first place. And then, the Democratic Party was like, all right, we got to give you guys a seat at the table and bring you in so that you don't cause even more trouble for profit. And then that's basically what's happened to organized labor. But it's very, very cool.
Lib, man. Stop talking about the Democratic Party. Don't you know? Just like stay on the sidelines, don't do anything, and complain on podcasts and yell at people for, not doing it right. That's what you're supposed to do, okay, Jamie? You're not actually.
I do that too. Don't worry. That is among the many things I do. But yeah, I'm so excited to see this massive wave of unionization across Starbucks. It's moving so quickly,
so fast. Very,
very cool. Very impressive.
Well, the model is, Michelle Eisen from Buffalo said it very well. She's like, the model is great because you have small Starbucks. There aren't a lot of workers there. It's a younger workforce, majority, at least like the new, and it's, so they're more accustomed to like these conversations. And it's just like more scalable in that sense. So I definitely admire them. And of course, once again, to Chris Smalls, and all of the Amazon workers who've been organizing in Staten Island. Incredible work. Jamie, I love you. You're the best. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
On Friday.
I'll try to get even healthier for next time.
Fully feel better. All right, get some rest.
Thank you. Me too.
Unionized labor rights highlight the issue. Talking heads left his best. The saga continues. The Nomiki show. The Nomiki show. The Nomiki show. The Nomiki Show.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us for this week's Femme Friday. As always, have a wonderful weekend and make sure to find us on Tuesday for TNS Live, Twitch and YouTube. And we're going to move over to rockfin.com/Nomiki for an extended conversation over at Rockfin. That is for TNS Live on Tuesday night at 8 p.m. In the meantime, stay in solidarity.
The Nomiki Show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed. Everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.